They called me the ghost in the machine, a quiet archivist easily overlooked. But what they dismissed as a worthless relic, a 20-year-old roll of parchment gathering dust in an old iron cabinet, was the very thing that made me the only person who could shatter their new CEO's $200 million deal. He thought he could sell the soul of this company. He just didn't realize I was the one who wrote it. My name is Aurélie Castillo, and I have been the living memory of this studio for so long that sometimes I forget what it feels like to be seen. 45 years old, born and raised in the sun-baked suburbs of San Antonio, Texas, where stories were the currency of life, passed down on front porches during long, humid evenings. My father was a librarian, a man who believed every book contained a world and every world deserved a guardian. My mother was a seamstress who could weave epic tales into the fabric she stitched. They taught me that the foundation of anything meaningful is the story it tells. The server hub's cooling fans were whirring with a desperate, high-pitched whine again. I'd already rerouted the power cables and cleaned the dust filters twice this month, but here I was at 7 in the morning, a set of precision tools spread on the anti-static mat. I knew the world builders and animators would descend into chaos without a stable connection to the lore archives. 20 years at Elysian Realms, and I still couldn't shake the habit of arriving first, of tending to the heart of our creation before anyone else knew it was faltering. Still playing technician, I see. The voice was smooth, edged with a condescending amusement that made my spine stiffen. Julian Thorne, our CEO of 8 months, stood in the doorway, framed like a magazine cover. Everything about him was aggressively modern, a stark contrast to the organized chaos of my office. The minimalist Italian suit that cost more than my car. The gleaming smartwatch that tracked his biometrics and stock portfolio in real time. The Stanford MBA he managed to mention in nearly every conversation. I didn't look up from the server, exposed wiring. Someone has to keep the worlds turning. He let out a short, dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. That's what we have an IT department for, Aurélie. Maybe you should focus on whatever your actual role in the value chain is here. Whatever your actual role is. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp. My hands didn't falter in their task, tightening a connection, checking a heatsink. But inside, a fault line I hadn't known existed began to fracture. 20 years. 20 years of 18-hour days, of weaving narratives so intricate they felt real, of ensuring that a character's motivation in year 1 was consistent with their actions in year 10. And this man, who probably thought a cap table was a piece of furniture, didn't even know what I did. Lead world builder and lore master. Though honestly, my title might as well have been the woman who keeps this universe from collapsing into a black hole of contradictions. The servers should be stable now, I said, closing the panel with a satisfying click. He was already scrolling through his phone, not even a glance to acknowledge my work, let alone a thank you. He just turned and walked away, probably checking user engagement metrics or texting his venture capital buddies. The archive room felt colder after he left, the morning light filtering through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like forgotten sprites. I cleaned my tools methodically, each one returning to its place in the leather roll my father had given me when I graduated. Every problem has a solution, he used to say. As long as you respect the foundation it's built on. The server hub hummed quietly now, ready to power another day of synergistic innovation, disruptive paradigms, and whatever other buzzwords Julian would sprinkle into his all-hands meetings. I walked to my office, not a corner office, despite my seniority. Those were for the people who looked good in shareholder presentations. My office was the studio's library, its heart. No grand views, but I had something better, a direct connection to everything that mattered. From my desk, I could feel the pulse of the studio. I knew when a quest line felt hollow, when an artist was struggling to capture the essence of a forgotten deity, when a new gameplay mechanic violated a fundamental law of our world's magic. The photo on my desk showed the original Elysian Realms team. 4 of us, crammed into a garage in 2003, raising cheap bottles of beer to toast the launch of our first, buggy, beautiful game. I was 25, fresh out of college with a degree in English literature and more passion than sense. The only woman, the only one who didn't write code, the only one who knew that a compelling world needed more than just pixels and polygons. It needed a soul. Now there were over 400 employees, satellite offices in Montreal and Poland, and talks of becoming a publicly traded company. The universe I had helped birth from nothing was worth hundreds of millions, according to the financial press Julian loved to court. But to him, I was just the woman who fiddled with the servers. I pulled up the latest build, scanning for lore inconsistencies before they became problems. A weapon description that contradicted its established origin. A line of dialogue from a non-playable character that broke the fourth wall. Small things, invisible things, the kind of details that made a world feel real but never made it into a quarterly earnings call. My email pinged, an all-staff message from Julian. Subject, a bold new chapter. My stomach tightened. In corporate speak, bold new chapters usually meant someone's story was about to be unceremoniously ended, but I opened it because that's what invisible people do. We watch, we listen. We file away every dismissive glance, every stolen idea, every moment someone shows us exactly what they think we're worth. And sometimes, we turn out to be the guardians of the one thing they never bothered to understand. The one thing they assumed was as irrelevant as they believed us to be. Julian Thorne thought he knew everything about Elysian realms. But he'd never asked about the old iron cabinet in the corner of my office, the one that looked more like a prop from one of our fantasy games than a piece of office furniture. He'd never wondered why I, alone among the early founders, had never sold a single one of my shares. He'd never considered that the woman who maintained the archives might be the one person who could bring his beautiful, ambitious plans to ruin. The email loaded. The sleek corporate logo, Julian's professionally photographed headshot, and there it was, buried in the third paragraph. A groundbreaking merger opportunity to maximize shareholder value and streamline creative operations. I pushed my chair back and walked to the iron cabinet, spinning the combination I'd memorized 2 decades ago. Inside, beneath old design documents and faded concept art, lay a rolled-up piece of parchment tied with a leather cord. The Founder's Charter. 50,000 shares of original Elysian Realms stock, issued back when the company was just 4 dreamers in a garage, when shares were promises written on paper, worth less than the ink they were printed with. Julian was about to learn what happens when you try to sell a world without consulting its architect, when you assume that the keeper of stories is powerless, when you forget to ask what the ghost in the machine might be holding in reserve. The memories always hit hardest when I walked past the old server racks in the archive. Even now, 20 years later, I could still smell the ozone and stale pizza from our first real office, a cramped space above a comic book shop. The kind of place you rent when your business plan is more faith than finance. Elysian Realms started there in 2003. Though started was a generous term for what we were doing. I was 25, with a degree in literature and a resume filled with bookstore clerk jobs. The founder, a brilliant, chaotic coder named Marcus, hired me because I was the only candidate who, instead of a resume, brought a 10-page document detailing the entire history of the fantasy world he had only vaguely described in the job posting. "You always take stories this seriously?" he'd asked, a grin on his face. "When you grow up believing they're real, yeah, you do," I'd answered, too young to know you were supposed to be more cynical in job interviews. He hired me on the spot. Lore Master, he called it. The title was a joke back then. My desk was a plank of wood over 2 filing cabinets. The server room was a closet with a loud air conditioner. But we were hungry. Hungry in that way only people who have been told their dreams are childish can be. The programmers, kids mostly, coded for days on end, sleeping under their desks. I built the world around their code. I wrote the histories, designed the pantheons of gods, crafted the languages, and ensured that every quest, every item, every character fit into the vast, breathing tapestry we were creating. I learned project management from online forums and contract law from library books. When we couldn't afford a writer, I wrote the dialogue. When we couldn't afford a tester, I played the game until my eyes burned, hunting for bugs and plot holes. The first payroll nearly destroyed us. We had just enough to pay everyone except me. "We can pay you next month," Marcus had promised, his face etched with worry. I knew there might not be a next month, so I did what my mother had taught me to do when the threads were thin. I wove a new pattern. I called the editor of a small gaming magazine I had an internship with years ago. I pitched him our story, not the game, but the story of us. 4 dreamers in a garage building a world. He ran it. A small investor read the article, loved our passion, and gave us just enough money to survive. We made payroll with enough left over for pizza. That's how it went. While the coders built the engine, I built the invisible architecture of the soul that kept us alive. The breakthrough came in 2005. Our first game, The Ashen Chronicles, became a cult hit. Suddenly, we had real money. Enough to move to a real office, hire a real team, maybe even get health insurance. We celebrated at a local pub, drunk on cheap beer and the unbelievable reality of our success. Around midnight, Marcus pulled me aside. "I want to do something for you," he said, his words earnest. "The coders have their stock options, but you are the heart of this. You should be protected." He called me a founder. The next morning, I showed up with documents I'd found online. A founder's charter, outlining share distribution, and, crucially, creative control. That's how I ended up with 50,000 shares of Elysian Realms stock, issued on a day when our biggest asset was a universe that existed only on our hard drives and in my head. Hidden in the legal jargon of that charter, a clause our pro bono lawyer insisted on, something he called the Guardian Clause. It was designed to protect the artistic vision of the company from purely financial interests. Insurance, he'd called it. You get it when you don't need it, so you have it when you do. For 20 years, that charter lay dormant. Other founders cashed out to buy houses and sports cars. Marcus sold his stake and retired to a quiet life in the mountains, but I held on. Those shares weren't just money to me. They were proof. Proof that I was there. Proof that someone had once looked at me, a literature major with no corporate experience, and seen a founder. Now, sitting in my library of an office, listening to Julian Thorne's slick corporate voice echo down the hall as he sold his vision of synergy to investors, I pulled out that charter again. The parchment was soft with age. 50,000 shares of common stock. According to the last valuation, each share was worth a decent amount. Not enough to matter in a $200 million merger, or so everyone assumed, but they had overlooked the fine print. They had forgotten about the clause designed to protect the soul of the company. They had forgotten about the Guardian. The first time Julian Thorne stole from me, it was so subtle I almost missed it. We were in a creative strategy meeting. I'd spent weeks outlining a new storyline for our next expansion, one that delved into the deep, forgotten lore of our world's creation. A complex, emotional narrative. Interesting, Julian had said, his tone suggesting the exact opposite. Let's put a pin in that. 2 weeks later, at a press event, he announced the theme of the new expansion. It was my exact storyline, stripped of its nuance and rebranded as his bold, market-driven narrative. My slides, my character arcs, my world-shattering plot twist, all presented as his visionary leadership. The only thing he'd changed was the title, from The Weaver's Lament to Project Titanfall. The second theft was bolder. The plan for a prequel game, exploring the origins of the world. I'd been developing it in my spare time for years. I mentioned it in a small team meeting. The next week, Julian announced to the board that he had personally spearheaded a task force to explore prequel opportunities. He looked at me across the table. "Orally, you're good with the old stuff. Can you pull together some research for my team?" Good with the old stuff. I had written the old stuff. I had breathed life into it. But to him, I was just a librarian for his grand ideas. The pattern became depressingly predictable. My ideas would be dismissed in private, then resurrected in public as his own. But it wasn't just the theft, it was the erasure. When gaming journalists came to profile our studio, Julian would walk them through our history, somehow skipping the years between the garage and the first blockbuster. In his version, a few brilliant coders had an idea, and then, as if by magic, a multi-million-dollar corporation appeared. No mention of the woman who wrote the stories that captured players' hearts. No mention of the person who built the universe brick by brick, word by word. The company newsletter ran a timeline of our greatest achievements. I wasn't in a single photo. It was like I was a ghost, haunting the halls of the world I had built. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, an email to the senior creative team. "Team, I want to introduce you to Cadden Vance, who will be joining us as our new narrative strategist, reporting directly to me." Cadden comes to us from the mobile gaming space with an impressive track record of optimizing narrative for user retention. Narrative strategist, the role I had been performing for 2 decades without the title. I read the email 3 times, looking for the part that explained my new role. There wasn't one. I was being replaced, erased from the org chart itself. My phone buzzed. It was Leo, our lead sound designer. "Are you seeing this?" Then others, all expressing shock and outrage, but I didn't respond. I sat in my office, surrounded by 20 years of creation, and felt something I hadn't felt since the early days in the garage. Hunger. Hunger for the truth to matter, for the invisible work to be seen. I opened the iron cabinet again, pulled out the founder's charter. The parchment felt heavy, as if it had absorbed all the years of being overlooked and underestimated. Julian thought he was smart, bringing in his mobile game Wunderkind to do my job. He thought he could erase me completely, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He never asked about the charter. He'd never wondered why I hadn't sold my shares. In his mind, the help didn't have leverage. The help didn't have power. The help certainly didn't have an ancient, ironclad protective clause that could derail a $200 million merger. The email dinged again. Another all-staff announcement. Exciting news. Elysian Realms enters merger discussions with Quantum Dynamics. I smiled. A real smile for the first time in months. The smile of a storyteller who just realized she was holding the pen and she was about to write the final chapter. Cadden could have the title. Julian could have his merger dreams. But I had something better. I had the Guardian Clause. And leverage was a story they couldn't steal, of course. Here is part 2 of the new story, The Lorekeeper's Gambit, written according to your precise specifications. The internal announcement hit our inboxes at 9:37 a.m. on a Wednesday. I know the precise time because I'd been watching my email like a dragon, guarding its hoard for 3 days, ever since Julian's assistant had accidentally left a preliminary merger document on the community printer. Subject: Elysian Realms announces groundbreaking partnership with Quantum Dynamics. Dear team, I am thrilled to announce that Elysian Realms has entered into exclusive negotiations with Quantum Dynamics for a strategic merger valued at $200 million. This transformative partnership will position us as a dominant force in the RPG market. As we move through this exciting transition, some organizational restructuring will be necessary to align with Quantum's standards of creative efficiency. More details to come in Friday's all-hands meeting. Forward always. Julian Thorne, CEO. I read it twice, decoding the corporate runes I'd learned over 20 years. Strategic partnership meant acquisition. Organizational restructuring meant layoffs. Creative efficiency meant they strip our worlds for parts and sell them as microtransactions. My phone started vibrating, the team chat for the narrative department exploding with a mix of panic and gallows humor. I stayed silent, reading the attached overview. There it was on page 7, section 432, redundancy elimination in legacy roles. My position wasn't even listed. Not eliminated, not retained. Simply absent as if I had never existed at all. The next 48 hours were a blur of hushed conversations in the hallways and worried faces peering over cubicle walls. People kept stopping by my office, the studio's library, looking for reassurance I couldn't give. On Friday, the all-hands meeting was held in the main atrium, the one with the giant, floor-to-ceiling mural of the world I had created. Julian stood at the front, a televangelist selling salvation, Cadden Vance flanking him like a disciple in a designer hoodie. This is our moment, Julian proclaimed, clicking through slides filled with hockey stick graphs and meaningless buzzwords. Quantum Dynamics isn't just acquiring us. They're investing in our vision, our future. The room was silent, 200 people trying to calculate their odds of survival. Now, I know change can be scary, he continued, his voice adopting a tone of rehearsed empathy, but I want to assure you all that Quantum values talent. The best and brightest of Elysian Realms will absolutely have a place in our new structure. Someone raised a hand. What about severance packages? Great question, Julian said, beaming as if it were a brilliant insight. Those who are affected by the transition will receive generous packages. We're talking 3 weeks per year of service, full benefits extension. 3 weeks per year. I did the math in my head. 60 weeks of pay to vanish quietly, to sign whatever non-disclosure agreement they slid in front of me, to pretend the last 20 years had been nothing more than a long-term contract. Any other questions? Julian scanned the room, his gaze sliding past me as if I were part of the scenery. I raised my hand. He hesitated, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he plastered on his public smile. Yes, orally. What about the founder's charter approval? The atrium, already quiet, went utterly still. Julian's smile faltered. I'm sorry? The merger, I said, standing up so everyone could see me. What about shareholder approval according to the original charter? Don't we need a vote? Cadden whispered something in Julian's ear. The CEO's face went through a rapid series of expressions before settling on patronizing patience. That's a technical detail, orally, that doesn't really concern the team here. I'm a founding shareholder, I interrupted, my voice clear and steady, so it concerns me. A genuine gasp went through the crowd. In 20 years, I had never interrupted a CEO. I had never spoken up in an all-hands meeting. I had never been anything but the quiet, reliable, invisible lore master. Well, Julian said, recovering his composure, minority shareholders will be notified through the proper channels, but with the board's unanimous approval and majority stakeholder consent, the merger will proceed. What percentage constitutes majority? I asked, more urgent whispering between Julian and Cadden. The CFO was typing furiously on his laptop. That's really getting into the weeds, Julian said, his voice tight. It's a simple question, I pressed. What percentage of shares need to approve the merger? The CFO looked up, his face pale. He showed his screen to Cadden, who showed it to Julian, who suddenly looked like he'd swallowed a bug. 66.7%, he said quietly. And current institutional and board ownership is silence. Mr. Thorne, I prompted. What percentage of shares do the institutional investors and board members control? Approximately 65%, the CFO answered when it was clear Julian wouldn't. I let that number hang in the air, watching as understanding dawned on the faces around me. So you need another 1.7%, I said. Minimum. As I said, Julian snapped, his recovery impressive. We're confident all shareholders will see the value in this merger. I sat back down. The seed was planted. The meeting ended with forced applause. I stayed in my seat, waiting. Sure enough, Julian appeared at my side, Cadden trailing him like a shadow. Orally, he said, his voice a low growl, my office. Now, I gathered my things slowly. Actually, I have a narrative sync scheduled. How about tomorrow? This can't wait. Then I suggest you ask more nicely, I said, looking him directly in the eye for the first time since he'd arrived at Elysian Realms. His jaw clenched. Cadden started to say something, but Julian held up a hand. Would you please join us in my office to discuss your concerns? The words sounded like they were being dragged from him over broken glass. Of course, I said pleasantly. Right after my sync, should be done by 3. I walked away, leaving them standing there. My phone buzzed before I reached my office. Urgent emails from legal, from HR. I ignored them all. At the top of a fresh page in my notebook, I wrote, the Guardian Clause. The summons came at 3:15, delivered by Julian's assistant. Mr. Thorne will see you now, she said, avoiding my eyes. He said immediately. I looked up, giving her a small, patient smile. Then he should have scheduled it for immediately. She fled. I gave it exactly 10 minutes, then made my way to the executive floor. Julian's office was a sterile glass box overlooking the city. He sat behind a massive modern desk. Cadden was to his right. The head of HR, a woman named Patricia, to his left. Legal was patched in on a giant screen. Please sit, Julian said, gesturing to the single, uncomfortable-looking chair in front of his desk. The power dynamics were clear. We need to discuss your shares, Julian began. I waited. We've reviewed the registry. You own 50,000 shares of common stock. That's correct. Shares that, frankly, we weren't aware still existed in that quantity. That sounds like a due diligence problem. The lawyer on the screen leaned forward. Ms. Castillo, these shares, they appear to be attached to an unusual charter. Not unusual, I corrected. Just old. From when this company was founded on principles, not just profit margins. Regardless, Julian cut in. We need all shareholders aligned. It's in everyone's best interest. Everyone, I asked, or just yours? The merger represents a significant premium. Your shares would be worth nearly $1.6 million. Actually, I said, flipping open my notebook. They're worth exactly $1,560,000. No approximately about it. So you agree it's a substantial sum? It is, I agreed. About $78,000 for every year I've been here. Minus taxes, of course. The point is, Cadden spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with condescension. You stand to benefit. As opposed to what? I asked. Keeping my job, your position, Julian started. Look, orally, let's be frank. The creative redundancies are necessary for optimal efficiency. You mean I'm being fired? Transitioned, Patricia corrected softly. With a very generous package. 60 weeks, I said, plus the share payout. So a little over $2 million for 20 years of building this company's soul. Building is a strong word, Cadden muttered. I turned to look at him. What would you call it when someone writes every history, every myth, every character Bible that allows 300 people to create a consistent universe? Maintenance, Julian said, sliding a folder across the desk. This is the separation agreement. I didn't touch it. What about my shares? Page 7, the lawyer said from the screen, you'll need to sign a waiver of your charter rights to receive the severance. There it was, the trap. And if I don't sign, then you'll be terminated for redundancy with standard notice. Julian's voice turned to ice. and your shares will be worth substantially less without the merger premium. We're trying to be fair, he said through gritted teeth. Fair? I asked. Like when you presented my storyline as your idea, or took credit for the prequel concept? Was that fair? Patricia's eyes widened. But Julian just smiled, a cold, predatory smile. I don't know what you're implying, I'm stating facts. Just like the fact that according to the Founders' Charter, any merger requires approval from holders of 66.7% of shares. You have 65. We're aware, he said tightly. Are you also aware of the Guardian Clause? The lawyer's fingers flew across his keyboard. His face went ashen as he read. What's the Guardian Clause? Patricia asked. I smiled. Protective provisions. Specifically, if any founding shareholder who has held their shares continuously since incorporation objects to a merger on the grounds of protecting the core artistic vision, the approval threshold increases to 80%. The room went completely still. That can't be right, Cadden said. It's in the original charter, I said helpfully. I should know. I was there when it was signed. The lawyer looked up from his screen, defeated. She's right, it's there. That's archaic, Julian sputtered. No modern company has provisions like that. No, I agreed. But we weren't a modern company in 2003. We were 4 people in a garage trying to make sure no one could ever sell the soul of what we were building. This is ridiculous, Julian said, pacing. One person can't block a $200 million deal. Actually, I said, that's exactly what the Guardian Clause was designed to do. Protect the creative minority from a purely financial majority. You're not being steamrolled, he snapped. You're being offered a fortune for shares you contributed nothing to building. Contributed nothing. The words echoed in the silent room. I stood up slowly. I see. Well then, this should be easy for you to handle without me. Sit down, Julian commanded. We are not done. Yes, I said quietly. We are. You've made your offer. I need time to consider it. How much time? The lawyer asked. Oh, I don't know. How long does it take to value 20 years of invisible work? 20 years of building this world while people like him, I nodded at Julian, took credit for its triumphs. I moved toward the door, then paused. By the way, the central lore server is still having sync issues. The support contract you mentioned, it expired 6 months ago. I've been maintaining it myself to save money. You might want to figure out who's going to do that now. I left them there, 4 executives in a glass box, finally beginning to understand that they had backed the one person who had nothing left to lose into a corner, only to find out she had built the walls, written the rules, and held the only key. They offered me $78,000 per year for 20 years of work. Now they were about to learn what my time was really worth. The steel box had lived in my closet for 2 decades. The combination was 2005, the year Marcus had signed the charter, drunk on the possibility that we might actually build something that mattered. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. The Founders' Charter, the original incorporation documents. But it was the charter that mattered now. I spread it on my kitchen table, running my finger down to the Guardian Clause. The lawyer, a young idealist named Davidson, had insisted on it. Just in case, he'd said. In case of what? Marcus had asked. In case you succeed, the lawyer had replied. Success brings vultures. 20 years later, the vultures had names like Julian Thorne and Cadden Vance. My phone had been silent for exactly 3 hours when the first text came from Patricia in HR. Hi, Aurelie, could we schedule a follow-up? I think there might be some misunderstandings. I didn't respond. 20 minutes later, the lawyer, Ms. Castillo, I'd like to discuss the charter provisions in more detail. By 6 p.m., I had 17 missed calls and 43 emails. The invisible woman was suddenly very visible. I made myself a proper dinner, something I hadn't done in months. If they wanted to negotiate, they could wait. The doorbell rang at 8:45. It was Patricia, looking deeply uncomfortable on my doorstep. This is highly irregular, I said, opening the door but not inviting her in. I know, Julian insisted. May I come in? I stepped aside. Patricia perched on the edge of my couch. Aurelie, I want you to know I've always respected what you do for Elysian. What I did, I corrected. Past tense, that's what I wanted to discuss. What if it didn't have to be past tense? I laughed. Are you offering me my job back? The job I've been doing for 20 years? How generous. Not your current position, she said quickly. Something better. A consulting role. 6-month contract, great pay, to help with the transition. In exchange for your cooperation with the merger. How much? I asked. $500 an hour. About $200,000. Added to the severance and share payout, they were now offering over $2 million to make me go away. That's a lot of money, I said. You deserve it, Patricia said. But this merger is happening. If it falls through now, the damage to Elysian would be catastrophic. And whose fault would that be? Does fault matter if everyone loses? Do you know what I did yesterday? I asked, turning to the window. No, I fixed a logic break in a side quest from our first game, a tiny detail no one would notice. But I fixed it because I knew that one broken piece of logic could unravel a player's immersion. That's the point. I turned to face her. None of you understand. You see world building as a cost center, an administrative burden, but nothing just happens. Someone has to make it happen. Someone who has been here long enough to know where all the bodies are buried. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Is that a threat? God, no, I said, suddenly exhausted. It's the truth. I know this place in a way that can't be transferred in a 6-month contract. But Julian has made it clear that knowledge has no value to him. So help us understand its value, Patricia urged. Name your price. My price. I sat back down. I want what Marcus promised me. Not money, real ownership. A voice that gets heard, not stolen. The merger terms are already set. Then change them. She didn't answer. Here's what I know, I said, picking up the charter from my coffee table. The Guardian Clause gives me the power to block this merger. Not because I own a lot of shares, but because I am a guardian. The one who does the work while others take the credit. The one who builds the foundation while others decorate the penthouse. The invisible one until suddenly I'm not. After she left, my phone buzzed. A text from Julian. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Let's find a solution. I typed back my first response of the day. I'll be in my office Monday morning. We can discuss it then. Let him wonder what I was planning. Let him feel, for just a few days, what it was like to be at someone else's mercy. The steel box sat open on my kitchen table, a document that had seemed worthless for so long, now worth more than I could imagine, not in dollars, but in power. The power to finally, after 20 years, make them see me, of course. Here is the final part of the news story, the Lorekeeper's Gambit, written according to your precise specifications. The weekend stretched like a siege. By Saturday afternoon, the emails from Elysian's legal team had evolved from professional to pleading, offering creative interpretations of the founder's charter that bordered on fan fiction. Cadden Vance tried calling from a number I didn't recognize, the background noise of a loud brunch spot bleeding through. Even 2 board members I'd only ever seen in company headshots suddenly found my phone number. I ignored them all. Instead, I did what I'd always done when faced with a sprawling, complex world. I organized it. I pulled 20 years of documentation from my home archives, creating a digital trail that told a very different story than the one Julian had been selling. Performance reviews praising my foundational contributions. Email threads where my narrative solutions had saved entire projects from cancellation. Design documents that showed my handwriting, my ideas, my soul on every page. Sunday morning brought an unexpected ally. Leo, our lead sound designer, showed up at my door with coffee and pastries. The whole studio is in chaos, he said, settling into my kitchen. Julian's called 4 emergency board meetings. Legal's been living there. Good, I said, the sweetness of the pastry tasting like vindication. Is it? Leo asked, his expression serious. Orally, people are scared. If this merger falls through, then maybe Julian should have thought of that before he decided I was expendable. You know, it's not just him who will suffer, he said gently. I sat down my coffee. He was right. The stock price would plummet. People's retirement funds would suffer. The planned layoffs might turn into a studio closure. What would you have me do? I asked. Roll over and let them erase me? No, he said. I'd have you fight, but smart. Like you always do. He pulled out his phone, showing me a private messaging channel I didn't know existed. It was the entire core creative team. They were all discussing how to support me, offering to write testimonials about my contributions, documenting every idea of mine that Julian had stolen. You're not as invisible as you think, Leo said. Not to the people who actually build these worlds with you. I stared at the messages, a tightness in my throat. 20 years of what I thought were just professional relationships, revealed as true alliances. There's something else, Leo continued. My sister-in-law is a corporate lawyer. She says a clause like your Guardian Clause is a nuke. They can't defuse it. Julian's scrambling because he knows he can't win. So what's his play? Make your life miserable until you surrender. Constructive dismissal. Let him try, I said. After Leo left, I sat with his words and my documentation, and a growing certainty that this was bigger than just me. This was for every quiet contributor, every invisible architect whose work was claimed by someone with a louder voice and a better suit. The text came at 11:23 p.m. on Sunday from Julian's assistant. Mr. Thorne requests your presence at a breakfast meeting tomorrow, 7:30 a.m. Executive Conference Room. This is not optional. I typed back, I'll be in my office at 9 a.m. as usual. He's welcome to visit me there. The response was immediate. Mr. Thorne insists, then Mr. Thorne will be disappointed. My phone rang instantly. It was Julian, his voice a whip of controlled fury. Stop playing games, Aurelie. I'm not playing, I said calmly. I'm establishing the rules. Something I should have done 20 years ago. You're destroying this company. No, I'm exercising my legal rights as a founder. If that destroys the company, perhaps you should examine why the company is so fragile. What do you want? The question exploded out of him. Just tell me what you want. I want you to see me, I said. Really see me. Not as a cost center, not as overhead, not as a problem to be solved. As someone who built this place. Fine, you're seen, you're valued. Is that what you need to hear? No, I said, because you don't mean it. Then what? You want more money, a title? What? I thought about Leo's advice. About leverage, about the team ready to stand with me. I want a seat on the Supreme Creative Council, I said. The silence on the line was absolute. That's impossible. No, it's negotiable, just like everything else. The council seats are allocated. Then unallocate one. You're not qualified. I've built this company's entire universe. I know its every secret, its every weakness, and its every strength. Tell me how I'm not qualified. This is extortion. No, I replied. This is negotiation. He hung up. Monday morning, I arrived at 9 on the dot. The core creative team was already gathered in the common area, a silent, powerful show of support. I had barely reached my office when 2 security guards appeared, looking apologetic. Ms. Castillo, we've been asked to escort you to the executive conference room. Asked or ordered? I gathered my files, the founder's charter on top. The walk to the executive floor felt like a scene from one of our games. As I passed, artists, writers, and designers began to stand up, first one by one, then in waves. By the time we reached the elevator, half the studio was on its feet, a silent, standing ovation. That, I said to the bewildered guards as the doors closed, was 20 years of respect. The executive conference room was packed. The board of directors, Julian, Cadden, a team from Quantum Dynamics, and enough lawyers to form their own guild. Thank you for joining us, Julian said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Thank you for the escort, I replied, taking the one empty seat. An older man at the head of the table, the board chairman, spoke. Ms. Castillo, we need to resolve this. The merger is in jeopardy because your CEO failed to read the founding documents of his own company, I interrupted. Let's not place blame where it doesn't belong. We're here to find a solution, the chairman said smoothly. Good, I've proposed one. A council seat in exchange for waiving my guardian clause rights. The room erupted. That's an unprecedented request, one of the suits from Quantum said. So is trying to erase a founder from the company she built, I shot back. What would you do with a council seat? The chairman asked. It was the first real question anyone had asked me. I'd ask the questions no one else is asking, I said. Like why our monetization strategy is destroying player trust. Why our development timelines are burning out our best talent. Why we're pursuing a merger that values short-term profit over the long-term health of the universe we've created. Those are creative concerns, Julian said dismissively. Everything is creative, I replied. Every line of code, every financial projection, every business deal is either building our world or tearing it down. Ignore the story, and you're building a castle on sand. The chairman studied me for a long moment. You've given us a lot to think about, Ms. Castillo. We'll need to discuss this internally. Of course, I stood. You know where to find me, in my office, keeping the world turning. The call came not from Elysian, but from an unfamiliar Seattle number. Ms. Castillo, this is Evelyn Reed from Nexus Interactive. I sat up straight. Nexus was the other company that had been trying to acquire Elysian, a publisher known for respecting creative integrity. I apologize for the secrecy, but I was hoping we could meet. Privately, we met at a quiet downtown lounge. Evelyn was sharp, direct, and had clearly done her homework. So, you're the woman holding up a $200 million deal with a 20-year-old piece of parchment, she said with a smile. It's a well-drafted piece of parchment, I replied. She opened her tablet. We did our own valuation during the bidding process. Our analysts estimate that your direct contributions, the worlds and stories you created, account for over 80% of Elysian's total intellectual property value. We calculate you've saved the company from creative bankruptcy at least twice, generating what we conservatively estimate to be $60 million in long-term value. Julian told you I was a legacy cost. Mr. Thorne told us many things. The data tells a different story. Ms. Castillo, she said, leaning forward. Is your opposition to this deal about power or about preservation? What's the difference? Power means you want a seat at their table. Preservation means you want to save the world you built. And if we offered you a way to do that, what if Nexus acquired Elysian instead? We'd need a leader, someone who understands the soul of that universe. We'd create a new role for you, Chief Universe Officer. A senior executive position, reporting directly to me. A 5-year contract, a significant salary, and a signing bonus of $1 million. I stared at her, speechless. We believe in compensating our creators for the value they generate, she added. What about my guardian clause? You waive it as part of our acquisition agreement. The quantum deal dies. The Nexus deal proceeds. Everyone who actually creates things wins. Everyone except my team. Bring them with you, Evelyn said without hesitation. We're not just buying an IP. We're investing in its guardians. The final showdown was in the same boardroom. All parties were present, including Evelyn Reed and her team from Nexus. Julian and the board made their final offer, a severance package of $2 million. Extortion, Julian muttered. That's when Evelyn spoke up, or she could accept Nexus's offer instead. The room went silent. What offer? The chairman asked. Evelyn calmly laid it out. Chief Universe Officer, the contract, the signing bonus. The protection for the entire creative team. I watched Julian's face as he processed it. His narrative of my redundancy was being publicly dismantled. You can't, he stammered. That's interference. With what? Evelyn asked mildly. Recognizing talent? That's not interference, Mr. Thorne. That's business. Orally, the chairman's voice cut through the tension. Is this what you want? To leave Elysian after 20 years? I looked at Julian, who still couldn't hide his contempt. What I wanted, I said, was to have 20 years of building a universe mean something. To not be thrown away like an old asset. I stood up. So here is my final offer. I waive my guardian clause. The quantum deal dies. You accept the acquisition offer from Nexus. In exchange, my entire core creative team is guaranteed their positions with raises under the new ownership. That's all? Julian asked, suspicious. No, you also give me a public apology for trying to erase me. The board, seeing a lifeline, agreed instantly. The deal was redrafted. Papers were signed. As I stood to leave, Julian cornered me. Was it worth it? Threatening everything for money? You still don't get it, I said, looking at him with a kind of pity. This was never about the money. It was about making sure the next quiet person who builds a world knows that they have the power to protect it, especially from kings who only care about the gold in the castle and not the foundation it's built on. I paused at the door. Oh, and Julian, that lore server that keeps crashing? The root cause is a corrupted file from the very first alpha build. The file is named Marcus Legacy. You have to honor the past to build a future. That's what makes it work. 3 months later, I stood in my new office at Nexus-owned Elysian Realms. It had windows. Leo and the team were in the studio next door, their laughter echoing down the hall as they planned a new world, free from the pressure of monetization funnels. Evelyn stopped by my door. Elysian's old stock under Quantum's planned acquisition model is worthless now, she mentioned casually. Apparently, investors got spooked when they realized the company's entire value was tied to a creative team they had actively tried to fire. Imagine that, I said. Caden Vance resigned last week. Apparently he prefers strategy to actual creation. Imagine that, too, Evelyn smiled. That guardian clause of yours. We're implementing similar protections for all our lead creatives. Good policy, I agreed. I turned back to my window, looking out at a city where I'd spent 20 years being invisible. Now I had a title that mattered, a team that was safe, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the story doesn't belong to the person who sells it. It belongs to the person who writes it. And me? I was finally, after 20 years, exactly where I belonged. Not a ghost, not a relic, not forgotten. Essential. The architect of worlds, finally in a kingdom of her own making.